Last Breath, a relatively small film about a stranded diver starring Woody Harrelson, hit theaters this weekend. Is it worth a trip to the movie theaters? Find out right now on Spoiler Alert. Welcome to Spoiler Alert. I'm your host, Sheldon Barlow, here with Evan Arujo, as always, ready to talk some spoilers. And today, we are talking about the latest release in Hollywood in a movie called Last Breath about a stranded diver who is actually based on a true story.
Which is cool.
And it was honestly a lot different than I thought it would be. But before we dive into giving you the spoilers and our thoughts on Last Breath, we have some big news, some pretty big news, which if
we have Star Wars news.
Follow the world of movies, and you already know what we're going to talk about when we say the word Lucasfilm. But Evan, hit us with it.
So first off, in case if any of you don't already know, we have Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, returning to theaters on April 25th, which means that I will be going the 24th for opening night, the 25th is a Friday, the 26th,
and the
27th.
Evan is kind of a fanatic. It's like his religion. You know, Evan's religion is Star Wars, and I respect it. Okay, I get it.
Our scale is different.
I was a huge Star Wars fan growing up, and I still like Star Wars. I'm just not as into it, I guess, as you are. But, I think it's going to be fun to be able to go back into the theaters and rewatch Revenge of the Sith. I
agree. That's going to be beautiful.
That was the first movie that I ever watched in a movie theater. I was 6 years old, 2005, and that was the first movie I ever saw in theaters. So it'll be kind of a
celebrating 20 years of Sheldon in the theater.
Exactly, my favorite place in the entire world.
On other Star Wars news, we got the trailer for Andor Season 2.
Andor Season 2. I will say, when I watched that trailer, for those of you who watched it, you know what I'm talking about. The music selection wasn't there. It was off. It was
interesting.
Odd.
Yeah, I wasn't a huge fan.
I felt like they were trying to take a modern, your modern choice of music and just inject it into this really gritty, dramatic, action-driven world of Star Wars, and it just didn't work for me.
Well, we've talked about it about the first season, but the first one, the grayscale and how it's supposed to be a very serious, almost kind of dark storyline, because it is. It's it's a little bit more serious. To then all of a sudden be like, oh, look at this fun music.
Right?
Like,
it's
what?
It's got a lot more of a muted color palette. The music is a lot kind of drawn out and long. It's very kind of got these heavy themes, and it's not something that you inject a modern pop song in to make it more fun and exciting.
On that note, the only reason why I bring this up is because there was one trailer in particular that I'm thinking of that did it really well, and it was the creator's trailer.
But the creator took a common song.
It made it fit that.
Right, it took Dream On, and it used that, and it turned it into a cinematic trailer, or to cinematic trailer song
to fit
to
that.
where it worked in that trailer, and that I think
they
it worked
could
really
have
good.
done something like that if they really loved and wanted this song.
I think if it was a different franchise, I would support that. But given it's Star Wars, you literally have one of the greatest composers of all time, who's
John
made
Williams,
the most memorable theme
pocket.
song of all time. Like, granted, John Williams can't compose every movie or every show, but take his themes that are the most iconic themes in cinema and just apply them to the trailer.
Well, they could have also done something similar along the lines of what Andor Season 1 already had and change it.
Right.
Make it a litlittle bit more intense, electro, or something to like...
Yeah, I just didn't think there was a need to just try and inject some kind of pop song in there that didn't belong.
Yeah,
because visually I think it looks good. I think it looks incredible, but it didn't...
it wasn't fitting.
The rebellion against the Empire is exciting enough, especially with how we've seen it start to build in Andor Season 1.
Is it pop fun?
They're just trying to hit a new generation of stupid kids who don't know how to watch anything with intelligence. I don't know. Don't ask me. Speaking of Star Wars, the best news to come out of Hollywood in a long time is we received the report that Kathleen Kennedy, currently the head of Lucasfilm, is going to be stepping down at the end of 2025.
Woo!
Now, if those reports are true, and I've heard it both ways, if those reports are true, then hallelujah, man.
God is real. I'll tell you what.
It's about time.
I know that
it
you
is
won't drink.
about time.
Well, I will drink.
I was thinking like, would I drink to that? I'll get a nice sparkling lemonade.
Nice.
That's about as far as I'll go.
And we can have a sparkly lemonade.
Yeah, and let's drink to that because holy cow, man, I am so ready for this. I am so ready for
Star
someone
Wars
who
to
knows
get
what
back.
they're doing and isn't gonna just try and inject every kind of stupid political message into the movie that you don't want to see. I'm so ready
It's
for
so
that to
bad.
be done. But I'm worried that might not even be the case. They might just be like, oh, let's find someone who's just a freaking Kathleen Kennedy clone. Let's just slap her on there. Let her do the exact same thing that this woman did to
I hope
destroy the most popular and memorable franchise in the history of cinema.
Yeah, I would hope that they don't, and I really pray that they'll let Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau kind of come back to light almost and come back into the driver's seat because they've done great work. They have.
It would be interesting. I'd also be interested in seeing Tony Gilroy, the guy who's responsible for writing Andor and Rogue One.
Oh, and he does some more of the actual,
I would be interested in seeing his take on it. Like, if I don't know if he has enough experience to be in
Interesting.
that kind of an executive producer type of role.
Yeah,
But
he's done
at
great
this
work
point, I would
so
take a
far.
dog. I would take a dog in that role before I would take Kathleen Kennedy or anybody like her because
I trust your newborn daughter.
I do. I trust my little baby girl to make better. She can't even speak, and I trust her to make better decisions.
Than
in
Kathleen
that,
Kennedy.
yeah, because that's honestly an insult to my daughter to even try and make that comparison. Because, good grief, Kathleen
The point
Kennedy
is,
has destroyed not
she's
only the
awful.
Star Wars franchise, but she also destroyed the Lucasfilm franchise. Because when you go and you watch Indiana Jones and Dial of Destiny, I guarantee you that most of what was done in that movie was not James Mangold. James Mangold is a pretty talented director.
We were talking about that when we talked about Dial of Destiny. He had some great work. So for him to come in and do such an awful job.
Right. You have to know that is not a James Mangold thing. That's a Kathleen Kennedy mandated, especially getting what's her face, Phoebe Waller-Bridge in
thank you.
there. Oh
Yeah,
my
I was like,
gosh.
I know that you know her.
You know
'cause
what,
you hate her.
Let's not even
Dive into
let's
that.
not even dive into that. It's just Star Wars is amazing for what it is.
We just
but it
wanted to go
has-
back to the way that it should be. and
Right,
it was.
right. And I think a big part of the reason why Star Wars and Marvel, for that matter, have taken such a downward trend is because they have focused so much on producing content rather than actual quality filmmaking.
Well, we've talked about this hundreds of times that I'd rather sit there and be like, you know what? I've got to wait 2 to 3 years for the next best Star Wars film. You know what? Okay. Compared to every single month or year, I can go and have some new crappy show that I get to find. And a great example was like Acolyte. Mandalorian was a little bit of an exception in like the Book of Boba Fett where they just kind of periodically release them. I'd rather have them scrap that all, wait 3 years and produce
Just-
a brand new movie.
Well, not only
and
that,
be
but
like,
yeah,
awesome.
do it a movie, make it an event, right? Because the big thing about Star Wars, right? You look at the original trilogy and even The Force Awakens, those movies made a lot of money at the box office, and people showed up to those movies in droves because it was an event. It was a cinematic event. It was something they had to wait years to be able to come and see, and it's something that they wanted to experience for the first time. And it's just
I agree.
it's not the same when you're like, oh, we're pumping out this new streaming content that you
Yeah,
could just
and
sit on
everybody's like, "Oh."
sit on your fat butt at home on your couch and watch it. And if you don't like it, just turn it off.
Or they do where it releases in theaters, but then they're like, but the next Friday you can watch it on HBO Max.
I
Paramount
wouldn't
Plus, or
even
whatever.
that like.
It's like what?
When we've talked about this before, and I'll say it again to anybody listening, the streaming industry is absolutely destroying the theater experience. It is destroying the entire theater industry, and it needs to stop. I cannot even begin to tell you how much I hate streaming. I hate it. You know what? If you want to throw movies that have been released 5 years ago onto a
Yeah, I
streaming
was gonna
service
say,
to make
when
them
we,
accessible,
when we needed
that is
to find
totally
something,
okay.
It was really
That's
helpful,
perfectly
but
fine.
That's about it.
But stop making content for streaming. Just stop it, please. Hollywood, please stop making
they're also
content for
wasting
streaming.
so much money.
It is. I don't under. Okay, you know what? We'll save this for the episode of
right,
that we
that's
do when we talk about streaming
Yeah,
versus
we should
theater.
probably go over
But
the movie that we
in
saw.
short, what I want to say is that I don't know that Star Wars is going to be able to recover from the damage that Kathleen Kennedy and
No.
Lucasfilm was done.
But that doesn't mean that
And-
doesn't mean that we can't work on that doesn't mean that we can't work on like what's next and new projects. And
We can hope for the best, but ultimately, I think
almost.
one of the biggest problems, not just the DEI and the over politicalization of Star Wars that has become,
Mm-hmm.
but make it an event. And I'm worried that Amazon MGM is going to do the same thing to James Bond
They're
as,
just gonna turn it into
Star
a
Wars
show.
and Marvel has done to their properties. Is that they just
suck.
they're so focused on pumping out content that they don't actually make quality, good productions that people wait for years to go to a theater to experience for the first time. And it's turned arguably the biggest franchise in the history of cinema into something that people don't care about anymore.
Yeah.
So
Which is tough. It's tough.
it's sad. That said, speaking of theaters and the reason why you should go to the theaters, we did see a movie.
Last Breath.
Last Breath. So Last Breath is a movie that is actually based on a documentary, which is based on a real life story.
Which is
because
cool.
That's what usually documentaries are.
Who would have thought?
Who would have thought? So it's based on a story about a diver who, with his team, they're on a mission, on an assignment in the North Sea to repair, I believe it's gas piping that is underwater. And they started the movie off explaining that there's like 20,000 miles of gas piping underwater, which I didn't know, which is freaking crazy.
That's cool.
But they have a mission to go and to repair a portion of it, and one of the divers gets stranded, and so the movie kind of follows about the rescue mission and what they're going to do. It stars Woody Harrelson. Woody Harrelson is pretty reliable, I think.
I mean, he proved himself in this role. He didn't have the lead role in
Right.
this movie, but like he was still a fun character to watch. He had his charismatic,
He has
usual tone.
Yeah,
with
his
him.
classic Woody Harrelson vibe. You know,
He
if
kind
you-
of brings that with wherever he really goes.
Yeah,
which I love.
he's Woody Harrelson. Like, you look at him in 2012, Hunger Games, Zombieland, right?
Yeah, he's always this.
He's
kinda
the same. Now you see me. He's the same guy in every movie, but he's someone who you can enjoy. You enjoy a lot just because he's
just kind of fun.
he's kind of crazy, right? You look at him, he's like, this dude doesn't have all his wires up there.
Yeah, he
but
kind of like lets loose on some things,
Yeah.
like dialogue wise, in a lot of his
I'd
movies.
be
and you're
interested
like,
to see him as a Batman villain. I don't know who. Maybe like Scarecrow. Like, imagine Woody Harrelson as Scarecrow.
I was gonna say Scarecrow. He could do a good job on the Joker. You would need somebody that's like clinically insane.
Willem Dafoe would be a really good Joker.
I disagree. He's too old. It
well,
wouldn't be
now,
very
but
fitting.
thinking about him back in the 90s.
Well, he already got Green Goblin. You get one.
okay.
And plus, we've got Heath Ledger. We won't dive into that. Next topic. Woody
Last
Harrelson
Breath.
was great. Love him.
Last
He's awesome.
Breath. So this movie was actually directed by the same guy that directed the documentary from a few years ago, which I think is an interesting choice.
Kind of makes me happy knowing that he did the documentary and now he's doing like his cinematic aspect
he
of it.
kind of already
where-
had experience in what he wanted in the story he wanted to tell.
Yeah,
so
and he already did it almost. That he was just kind of like, cool. Now I just need to add different effects, and I like that for the sake of the story aspect, right? When you're going in and you're telling a story, or a story's already been made, and you're kind of following those guidelines. That makes me happy because then they know that it's a good story. We're just adding it to make it a little bit more new. Granted, it's not that new, fresh aspect that people like, but they kept it to a pretty decent T to the documentary as far as, what
Right.
actually happens. It wasn't exactly because they had to make some of it cinematic and make up a little bit to make it be
and then
entertaining.
I'll get to that when I talk about some of the pros and cons. But let's start off with the pros of this movie. Actually, before we start with the pros, in case you missed our plot summary because we were talking a little too fast, which I have the habit of doing.
Me as well.
This movie, right, is about a diver who's stranded, and that's really all there is to the plot. Is that they have a mission, they have to repair some gas pipes in the North Sea, and one of the divers gets stranded because of some outside
His
circumstances.
I like how they called it the umbilical cord, but his cord that basically kept him onto the ship and everything got stuck. Eventually, the boat gets pushed away and he gets lost, and it's about them basically going in, trying to rescue and find him.
Right.
Which is crazy that it's a true story.
That's actually what I want to talk about at the end because it's incredible. But
It
let's
is.
let's talk about some of the pros of this movie as
Okay.
far as the theatrical experience, as far as the cinematic.
My first
event
one,
goes.
right when we're thrown in, right, you kind of learn the characters, learn the story. The first, I would say 10 minutes of them getting into their pod, the first time, we saw this cool cinematic experience of how the divers work. Like for me, clearly have no clue how
Yeah.
deep sea divers work.
Which-
So seeing all the mechanics, the electrical aspect, all the different tanks, the machinery, like that to me was really appealing. That I remember I was sitting there and I was like, Oh, that's how that works. Oh, that's really cool. Wait, that moves? And it was just kind of like new to me for some people who might know about that. They're like, but I really like that just right off the bat. This is new for me. Like, I don't know crap about
Yeah,
deep sea
no,
diving.
I feel like they did a really good job of educating an audience on what goes into diving without being over reliant on so much exposition.
Yeah.
So even just like the way they visually followed the main character, his name's Chris. The way they just followed him into his assignment as he goes onto the ship and kind of gets himself ready.
Mm-hmm.
You felt like you could start to understand. Oh, this is the day in the life of a diver.
Yeah.
And I really like that because they were able to convey that without having you sit through 20 minutes of exposition explaining to you what divers do and how they do it.
Mm-hmm. Where it wasn't I think that they did I mean, granted, it was based off a true story, so clearly, but it wasn't a kind of thing where they're like, oh, we've got a new guy on board, let's show him how it's done, and then that's their way of like educating the audience on how things work. They're just like, nope, we're gonna give you shots. And it was still informative that we could pay attention to be like, okay, this is where they're supposed to be, they can't exit here, this closes without. This is the tube that opens and closes. You cannot go in and out. And it wasn't too eccentric.
And something that I really liked that they did at the start of the movie is once the divers, right? So these divers, which I guess is how it really goes, they have when they're going into the deep, deep sea, which in this movie they're I think 300 feet deep under the ocean. So
yeah.
I believe, and someone could fact check me on this, but I believe when you're going that deep into the ocean, you have to be able to breathe. There's some different mixture of what you breathe in order to make your
like
body
a different
function.
Type of oxygen.
Right.
Almost.
There's a different mixture, I think. Again, don't take
because
this as
of the
fact.
elevation.
I'm not a scientist. I'm not a biologist.
But it's the elevation. It's the same when you're too high.
Yeah. So I believe you have to be breathing in a different type of oxygen. I don't know if type of oxygen is the right word.
Say that.
But a different mixture of oxygen in order to allow your body to work properly when you're that far under the water.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order to do that, they put them in these tanks for a few days to get them ready, to get them breathing into that. And when they are showing that in the movie, it makes you feel very claustrophobic, which I hated, but I loved because I hate. I'm a big guy. I hate.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of it,
tight
but
spaces.
it made you. It related it.
Right. It makes it.
You were like,
real.
oh, this sucks. This is horrible. I'm scared or whatever. But then you start to you're following and being a part of the story more.
Mm-hmm.
So I get that. I like that.
So I thought that was really good. And just overall throughout the movie, as they take you underwater, right? It feels very dark and very claustrophobic, and it makes you feel scared for the characters because you're like, I do not want to ever be in that situation.
Well, the scenes when they're under the water and they can see literally 3 feet in front of them, or for me the kind of cool but the scarier parts was with the thermal camera of the little bot that was following them, and you just couldn't see anything.
Yeah.
At all, but you knew what was going on because they were giving you context clues and telling you. I thought that was really good. They did a great depiction on how that scene and that situation would have happened.
Which, on that visual note, visually this movie I think was really well done.
I agree.
The cinematography was really good. The way they composed shots made you feel that claustrophobia. They made you feel that tension. And something this movie does really well is put you in suspense, although something I'll talk about in my cons is that it's not long enough to really draw it out for an extended period of time.
Well, yeah, we'll dive into why and the cons because I'm in the same boat with you as well. But on another note, for the pros, I'd say score.
Yeah,
and I know that you agreed with that.
The score of this movie was
they did great.
It was really well done, and I don't know who did the score. I don't know if I can see it on the poster here, but I don't know who it was that did the score. But somebody did it.
It fit really well. It just did.
It did, and it was very intense. It was very epic. It made you feel like that this huge boat that they were on, this huge tanker, was this massive behemoth type of sea vessel, and it kind of gives you that epic feeling. And I remember before we went and saw this movie, I was looking up to see who did the score, and it wasn't someone I recognized. Never heard a score by him before, but I thought it was really well done, and
I agree.
It not only gave you that epic feeling of, wow, we're really embarking on this big voyage, right? But it also worked really well to give you those emotional moments that you needed and to build the suspense and the tension, kind of the mysterious type of elements.
I would say that they did a better job on like the suspense and the tension. Like when he's climbing up the ladder, he's got to pull himself up. Like the music would get really intense.
Right.
You'd see the boat, the waves were crashing, and then it would like change the tone to match the atmosphere. Like they just did a really good job at, I guess you could call music matching with the scene. I mean, that's literally what they did. They made sure that the scene
right. I mean, that's
and
just,
the music
that's the job of the composer,
together.
right?
Yeah.
It's to take what a director shot and to be able to give it emotion through music.
But I really enjoyed the score. It was really good.
It was. And really, I think one of
fun.
the things that I think about when I watch this movie, just overall, is it felt like it was made with love. Like it felt like they really wanted to be able to tell this story.
They wanted
in a
to
cinematic
honor this
way.
guy.
Yeah. It didn't feel. I mean, maybe that's just because we just barely watched Captain America: Brave New World, where
anything is better.
So anything is better. But it gave you that sense of wow, these people really they cared about the movie they were making. They wanted to put some effort.
Even these actors.
Yeah.
I mean, a great example is Woody Harrelson. He's not, I don't think like A or S tier like actor where he's like super well that you look at him, you're like he has great roles like a Christian Bale type of thing where he's a very serious and a good actor. But him and Simu, they're pretty decently known actors. They didn't have to take a little bit, not that this wasn't a lower role or a lower type of movie, but you know what I'm saying.
Right.
Like, this movie isn't very mainstream. They didn't have to, but I can guarantee you that they wanted and took this role because they saw the purpose and they saw the vision behind it. And that's another reason why I really enjoyed it.
It paid off because I think the acting in this movie is really well, especially by Finn Cole, who plays the main character, Chris, is the way, just right from the very beginning, they make him very likable. And so
he's very friendly. He knows everybody, chipper attitude.
And you get the feeling that he's someone who loves what he does, even though he knows it's dangerous. He loves what he does.
Yep.
And he gives off that energy that you need for a role like this to tell this story. So by the time spoiler alert, by the time he gets stranded.
What?
By the time he gets stranded in the ocean, you really feel for him because you actually come to care about him just because the way that he's able to portray him, it makes you feel like a real person.
Yeah.
It makes him feel like a real person.
They did a great job with that as well. Score scene. Honestly, for a movie that I didn't really know of and a production company called Focus Features, I've seen a few random things by them.
Yeah, but they're not a big they're not a big studio,
known.
and there were several studios that were involved in financing this movie. Just a little trick, okay? If you don't know this, which you probably do, if you don't know this, when you're watching a movie, go and watch which logos appear at the beginning of a movie. That's generally the people who primarily financed it, right?
Which was
so when you watch a movie,
Black City Manor. Surprised I remember
when
that.
When there's 5 production companies at the beginning of the movie, that means that it was, for the most part, they had a project that a big studio like Disney or Universal or Paramount wasn't going to fund. And so
they had smaller ones.
Yeah, they went to smaller production companies to fund it. So and honestly,
I'm happy with it.
Explain that to you as if you don't know it, but if you don't, now you do.
If you don't know, now you know.
If you don't know, now you know. So something, again, that I really liked at the beginning of the movie is they start off by explaining the fact that there's 20,000 miles of gas piping and that there's a job that people actually have to go down to as low as 1,000 feet
to mess
underwater
with these gas
in order
pipes,
to fix these.
Fix it.
And so I thought they did a really good job of educating an audience on that, on the existence of that. So it's not just like
I think some people have a really broad aspect of it, right? Like some people think like, oh, there's oil rigs, there's deep sea divers. Like, okay, well, duh, there's types of jobs almost anywhere for everything. But they really shedded light, and that's why I, again, mentioned earlier that I liked it because it made us feel more connected because it was newer. We're like, we don't really know a lot about this.
It definitely felt like a new experience. Just going to see this movie in a theater where it's very loud, it's very big. Mm-hmm. It felt like a new experience, and it felt like something I hadn't really seen before, even if we've seen underwater movies before.
Like I saw The Little Mermaid, and it was not the same, I'm surprised I still have a straight face. Damn it. It's a great movie.
Let's retake that, right? Let's go back, pretend like Evan didn't say that.
It's like me saying I'm excited to see Snow White. I know that you're not. Even my mom said that she wasn't.
We are
Back
now
to the last
we are
breath.
now having job openings for my new co-host on Spoiler Alert as
Hey,
Evan is
you
going
can take
to.
your wife on here anytime.
That's true.
She just would agree.
At least
with
she's not
everything.
excited to see Snow White.
Well played.
Well played.
Well played.
Um,
Back to the last breath.
The Last Breath. So I guess any other pros that you would mention this movie? Any reasons why you'd say tell people to go see this movie?
Honestly, I kind of already mentioned it. Like overall, we both walked into this movie kind of just expecting it to be a little bit more of that average score, and it performed above average. Which for me, on a film like this, that isn't really known, doesn't really have a big production studio. It's also based off a true story, so the imaginary aspect isn't really there. It just has to kind of follow a simple story.
Right, which we'll get into the cons
Yeah.
when I talk about that.
But they did a really fun job. I'd probably go see it again, but not for a while. Like I'm not gonna go back to the theater and be like, that was so good, I'm gonna see it again.
What I will say though is if you do want to see this movie, absolutely see it in theaters because the experience I think will be different because it is very loud.
The
at certain
soundtrack
parts,
was so
and
fun.
it's very big,
Yes.
and so I think it'll have an effect when you go see it in the theater.
Yeah.
The last thing I would say is let's talk about the real life story for a minute. Okay,
Yes.
so this movie's based on a real story, and again, we're gonna spoil the movie, right? So if you really don't want to know how this movie ends or what
Crazy.
happens, here's what happens, and just skip to when we stop talking about it. But the main character, Chris, right? Real life story, real guy, real diver. He gets they call it an umbilical cord, like Evan mentioned.
It's kind of
Where it's providing you oxygen, it's providing you communication with
Power,
the boat, and it's
everything.
providing you power, it's providing you with warmth because you're going way under the water. It's very cold down there.
but it's also your
So
almost ticket home,
Right,
'Cause
so-
it's how you're connected to
Yeah.
the
it's also guiding. It's also a guide to you back to
did they
the
call it the bell?
yeah.
Called the bell, right?
Yeah.
They called it the bell.
And so about halfway through the movie, when they're on this mission, Chris is so the whole mission is taking place during a big storm. So it's very stormy, very lots of waves,
Rough.
very windy, very rough, and the boat starts to drift because normally they go to a spot, they just kind of anchor down or settle down there, and the boat starts to drift and it pulls Chris away from where he's supposed to be, and his umbilical cord gets caught and it rips, and he ends up having to be abandoned by his other comrade, which is played by Simu Liu, and so they have to leave him behind, and
the story takes place of him losing oxygen. That's why it's
Right.
called Last Breath.
right, and so he's down there alone, stranded. He has 10 minutes before his oxygen tank runs out, and it does. So he climbs to the top of the little area where they're working to wait for the rescuers to come back. His oxygen runs out, and this is real. This is a true story. It's out. He's out of oxygen for 29 minutes.
I think that they did in the movie. They were like he was approximately out for. I think that they said 29 minutes and like 15 seconds. or
Right.
something.
So in the movie,
basically a half an hour.
in the
without
movie,
oxygen.
it shows on screen. It's like time or oxygen remaining, and it has like a countdown that
And
shows
then-
up periodically, which I thought was a really clever way to tell the audience where we're at
Yeah.
with him. But from the time he lost oxygen and went unconscious until the time he was rescued and brought back to the boat was 29 minutes, and miraculously, again, spoiler alert, he lived. And even more miraculously is that he had no lasting physical or mental
I think what they were
damage from
saying. Yeah,
that.
I was gonna say like clearly there's some of the trauma of like.
Well, right, but
oh, I basically
you-
died. But
physically,
he didn't-
right? If you go without oxygen
For that
to your
long.
brain for that long, you should have brain damage. You should not even. Well, if you're not dead already,
Neurological or
you will
nerve
have
damage. You
yeah,
should.
You'll have extensive damage. But
I like how they said they mentioned it a few times and on the poster too. They're like scientists couldn't even prove how he
right,
lived.
right. So for me, I'm a very religious person. To me, that just is like a statement for my belief in God. That's what it really showed to me.
Yeah,
is that was
If
a
you're
miracle.
strong enough.
right?
It was.
That showed to me that was a miracle, and so that's why I think I loved this story. Is because first off, it was a true story. I mean, if it's just a movie, it's a movie, right? Like
you
it's
can
not
make up
believable.
whatever, and then you kind of go into that science
But
fiction almost.
Just
right?
knowing that actually happened, that's like incredible to me. That's incredible that someone was able to go through that and then be able to come out of it. And what's even more amazing is that he actually went back.
Oh
after
my gosh,
the fact.
dude. We were in the theater and it showed also I love how they showed like some of the original like audio and clips
Right,
of
right.
him in the series. And then you kind of like saw how the director took from how it actually happened, and like he made it very, very similar, which I loved. So thank you. But it was so cool. And I was like, I looked over and I was like, what the hell? And it was like 2 weeks later, Chris and his team went down and finished the job that they were starting.
Yeah.
And I was like, bro, I would have given
That's
up.
insane. Like, this dude should have been dead.
He literally died for 30 minutes, was like, hey, we got to
Yeah.
go back down there and finish the job. And I was like,
It's incredible. So
Good
as a
job.
story, you know, adapting it into a movie, it's an incredible real life story.
yeah.
That is, for me, very faith promoting, and I like that about it.
I mean, I don't believe on that aspect on why I like the movie. I thought that it was just really, really well done. But I understand what you're saying because in a scientifical aspect and in a
Didn't make
logical
any
aspect,
sense, right?
that dude should be dead.
He should be dead.
Yeah.
So
Super
that
cool, though.
said,
Anyway.
those are a lot of things that we liked about the movie. So let's talk about the things that we didn't like. And, you know, because I think there's more pros than cons in this movie, it's not as fun bashing on a movie that's better or more well made. But we got to talk about some things that weren't well done, just so that you were aware. And,
The main one we both agree on because we talked about it. I mean, it's a true story, which means that there's a story that they have to stick to. And it's the pro and a con, right? Because pro means that they're depicting the story really well, they're keeping it accurate, but then there's the theatrical aspect. They can't kind of make up a lot. They had to do some. I know that there was a lot in there that they kind of just like threw in there for the fun of it, but it had to stick to such a small story. That's why this movie was only an hour and 30 minutes runtime.
And normally
So-
it's hard to con a movie for that, but in this case, this movie really was kind of just banking around the one scene of him being rescued. That's not to say the rest of the movie was bad or anything, but again, when you're trying to tell a true life story, generally you have to invent things.
A little
But
bit.
I think the reason why this, I don't know, maybe they added a lot of fake elements to this movie, but it didn't seem like that. And I think the reason for that is because you took the documentary director and you had him direct this movie, which means he knew the source material very well. He knew the story very well.
Yeah,
And he's just
that's
trying to
fair.
adapt that onto the bigger screen.
Yeah, and honestly, they did a really good job at taking a very serious, not bland story, because it's a very serious story, clearly, but you know what I mean. It's not aliens fighting, flying
Right.
kind of shit.
It's not a Red Hulk destroying the White House or anything like that. It's okay. We don't have to think about that, Evan. We don't have to think about that. We're past that. We don't have to ever watch Captain
I'm
America:
gonna have
Brave
to
New
get
World
a
again.
therapist if I have to watch that movie.
I know.
again.
That's how I feel about Indiana
But
Jones:
I'd
The
say
Dial of
that-
Destiny.
I was so pissed that I have to watch that for the second time. But back to this, because before I genuinely crash out on camera, yeah, it's a pro and a con, right? They had to stick to a very specific script. Pro, they did a really good job because they kept the same director, basically. But con, it's not that
It felt more like a scene than a movie.
It felt like it was just one really intense like hour that you're like, okay, it's over now.
Yeah. And so again, that it's hard to fault a movie for that if it wants to stay true to what actually happened. But
yeah, so I
in
can't
my
really
opinion,
get too mad.
if you're going to adapt that into a feature film,
Yeah.
you have to find a way to draw that out, right? You have to find a way to make it still feel like
They could
a
have
typical
given
3-act
us,
movie, but
They could have given us a little bit more because when he was getting his 10-minute countdown, we only saw 2, maybe 3 really brief scenes of what he was doing.
right.
They could have given us a lot more where like he starts to wander off in the wrong direction. Maybe he like rethought about it, was like, wait, I should be going this way. And then like that's something that they kind of make up to just make the story like more engaging. Like,
Yeah,
what are
which
the
I-
odds that he went this
Which
way? Like,
again, it's not like you want to create things, but if you want to make it into a feature film, that doesn't take away from what really happened enough.
but you have to add
change
a
it,
little
right?
bit of that Hollywood. You got to give a little
Right,
bit
you
of
just,
those
have,
sprinkles.
you just have to add additional story elements to make it more feel like a movie instead of just a sequence in a movie.
You have to.
And so I think that, honestly, that's really my only big con for this movie, is that it felt more like half of a movie than a whole 3-act story.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any other cons that you would...
Not really. Honestly, I gave this movie a lot of the benefit of the doubt. It's a smaller production team, different financing, and we both kind of knew that it was based off a true story. So we understood from the beginning that this wasn't going to be a really, really big theatrical aspect. We kind of knew, hey, they're taking their time to tell a really good story. It's how they're depicting it that's going to determine really how our score was. So
Yeah.
I didn't really con it too much because I knew that This didn't have this millions and millions of dollars budget that some of these other movies do that they could have made really realistic, like really. But they did a great job. Like a lot
Yeah.
of this was very real. I can feel and I can see on some of the sets where they basically just had like almost like a big pool that they were just in, like doing the scene itself and everything.
Yeah.
But
really
yeah,
that-
it was really fun.
That really is the only major flaw of this movie because
Yeah.
like the acting was really good, the score was really good, the set design was really good. It's just kind of that, how do we balance making a well-paced movie? How do we balance staying true to the story, and how do we balance trying to tell a coherent 3-act kind of story?
I think the only thing that I would fix about the movie would be, just as I was thinking about it, I didn't really like, I felt like the actor for the wife, the actress of the wife, she didn't really do a good job at being very emotional and missing hubby or Chris. Because in the very beginning, you kind of see, Chris is coming home. He's excited to see her. And she's just kind of like, oh, yeah, okay. And then they start kissing.
Something that you could have
I don't
done,
know.
too, with that.
That's just personal
in order
preference.
to kind of make it feel, I don't know if drawn out is the right word, because it was an hour and a half, but it didn't feel like an hour and a half.
It did go by pretty quick,
It felt very quick, and
which
so
I didn't mind.
I like that it went
I
by
don't-
quick, but
I
part
don't
of the
mind
bit
that.
is that the reason why I didn't like it is because it didn't feel like a full story. It just kind of felt like, hey kids, let me sit down for
It
10
felt like we
minutes
were
and
at
I'll
our
tell you this
lunch
story.
break and just
Yeah.
like, let's put a movie on while we're during
Yeah.
lunch. Which,
So-
like, I get. I mean, when we kind of reached the end, we were kind of like, oh, yeah, that's it. And I saw my watch and I was like, oh, yeah, I mean, we're out of the
Right.
theater soon.
So yeah, I mean, I don't fault it that much. So that said, let's talk about
I
how
agree.
we rate it.
Yeah.
We're gonna update this, okay? One day, not today, but we are gonna update this one day.
Yeah, we'll have to do it.
My movie
Probably
scale,
next week
as
or
of
the
right
week after.
now, for just your general
Still the
movies,
same.
still the same. Mission Impossible Fallout's a 10-star for me, while The Creator's
It's
a
just
5-star.
So sad to see it a 5-star, but
and
it's true.
Independence Day Resurgence, not to be confused with the original Independence Day, is a 1-star. Evan's scale is still Interstellar
Sadness,
at 10.
not so sadness, and perfection.
There you go. So that said, how do we rate Last Breath? I was very more generous with it, I thought.
I think.
I gave it a 7
Yeah.
because I think it's a really good movie, and I would very much recommend that anybody watching go see it.
Well, I mean,
It's a good theater experience.
and it tells a really great story.
It does tell a very good story. By only
informative,
the
great
reason why I
story.
have it a 7 is because it doesn't feel like it tells a whole complete story. It feels more like it tells
It's
just
a portion.
part of
It's
a
a
story.
portion of Chris's adventure, basically.
Yeah.
Right. Which also that's kind of what it's meant to do. So we kind of have to like. You can't really fault it too much, but
Yeah.
it's just at the end of the day, you're like, it's just how it is, right?
Evan, you
I
gave
a
it
6.5. Yeah.
6.5.
Same thing. I mean, we're both kind of right around there where it was an enjoyable film. There was a lot of elements to it, but it doesn't really pass that 7.5, 8 mark to me that really makes it a big cinematic difference that I was like, wow, this had an impact. This was really standing out in XYZ categories. You kind of can't fault it though, like I
Right.
mentioned, because it's a little bit more on that documentary side of things, but it was still a really enjoyable watch.
How do audiences rate this movie and critics?
I think
Well, we're pretty close.
yeah.
IMDb right now has it as a 6.7.
So I'm right there.
right there.
Rotten
Tomatoes.
Yeah, they were
The
higher.
critics have it at a 76%, which I can understand because I think it is a very well-made movie. for
I
the
don't
most
think that
part.
this movie's above an 8, and I don't think it's below a 6. I think it falls in between there on personal preference.
That's fair.
I agree on
That's
that.
fair. So any final thoughts on Last Breath? Any last breath thoughts?
Whoa!
Whoa!
Whoa, that's cringe,
Yeah,
but
that
what
was
are we
pretty
not
bad.
here for? Honestly, I mean, we bring it up every time, right? Go see a movie in the theater. And it really was, it was a fun watch.
It was a cool experience because you're
Also,
there.
didn't take much time out of our day.
No, it wasn't. It's an hour and a
What?
half. It's an hour and a half.
It was
Go
fun.
see it. It's
Yeah.
on the big screen with the very loud sound.
I think you have to do it in the big screen to really experience that score and that soundtrack. Not that you can't watch it at home. We're not going to get into that because I'm not a huge fan of watching
Something
movies
that's
at home.
really cool that's not going to have the same effect at home is when Chris's cord snaps, there's just a lot of chaos,
I
a lot
love
of
it.
panic. And like he's like, I can't breathe. And then he's like, you need to open your extra
And then-
oxygen tank. And then it snaps. And there's silence.
It
There's
reminded
nothing.
It reminded me. Snap brought me back to the scene in Interstellar where you're like, where he's saying,
Yeah, it's very similar with the docking scene.
yeah, and he's like, Dr. Man, you can't be docking.
And
Dr.
then it just
Man,
explodes.
Dr.
Yeah, and it's just silence.
And then it just like,
And it works so well in this movie, especially because of how dark it is.
yeah,
And
it felt like space.
It was intense. It was very scary. Yeah. So again, I think that would be my recommendation. It's a good movie, and if you really want to keep the theater industry alive, go see it.
Yeah.
Take the time. It's worth it. With that said, be sure to like this video because you like it, whether you like it or not. And give us your thoughts, right? Let us know in the comments what you think if you have seen this movie. Let us know of other movies you'd like us to see and review when there's not movies coming out in the theater, and we'll see what we can do about that. But that said, this has been Spoiler Alert. Thank you for tuning in, and we will catch you next time.